Hello, Babs. We're back with more Bürgermeister's daughter. I'm reading it at night, which isn't a normal time for me, Babs. So, if you see a glare on the cover, that's why. We return back to Anna's case in the waning 25. What is it, 20 pages? 20 pages or so, bruv. Yeah, 21 pages. Anna is still fighting, contesting the will of her father. Let's get to this. A conspirator in curator's clothing. If anyone was in a position in 1551 to provide a credible account of Anna's behavior 7 years earlier and confirm one or the other narrative of events, it was surely cousin Conrad Büchler Jr., her council-appointed curator. He made two statements under oath about these crucial matters. The first in response to her siblings' testimony that she had freely joined in the agreement. The second in response to Anna's testimony that she had signed the agreement against her will and under the threat of jail. He agreed that she had freely and willingly sworn to abide by the terms of the agreement, something he knew for a fact because he had stood by her side in the council room when she did so. On the other hand, he gave her some slight benefit of doubt when she protested that she had signed the agreement out of fear because he had not been present during the deliberations and created the final document and had no prior knowledge of any coercion. He could not say for sure whether in the end she had signed the agreement under duress, although to all appearances he believed she had not. At another hearing, testifying on the very same matter for a second time, Conrad Büchler stated emphatically that she had freely and willingly signed the agreement. Never did he hear a word from her about being threatened with jail if she did not. Indeed, she asked to sign the agreement herself. There was not the slightest coercion, and she freely accepted praise and swore allegiance to it. He assumed that such had truly been the case because he never heard her protest the agreement, nor did she ever instruct him in any way to contest it on her behalf. So according to the person arguably in the best position to know, Anna had entered the agreement knowingly, willingly, even pleasantly. If any coercion had been involved, only she and her intimidators knew about it at the time. It was not until she had fled whole and began denouncing her brother and the city council on the streets of Speyer that her curator and presumably everyone else involved in the case realized that appearances had belied reality. For any judges who may have doubted that Conrad Büchler's testimony added new weight to her siblings' allegation that Anna had become disenchanted with the agreement only after the fact and had not opposed it from the start. If this was the case, as the vast majority of witnesses testified, her only compelling legal argument for overturning it, that she had acted under duress, was groundless. On still other, less subtly argued issues, her curator also contradicted Anna's testimony, again giving credence to her siblings and the city council's version of events. Some of these issues were minor. He did not, for example, believe that her father's wealth was as great as the 20,000 gulden she claimed, or that her brother Philip was the fearsome councilman she portrayed him as being. He was a member of the council, but not the entire council, as Conrad Büchler put it. He also disputed Anna's statement that her siblings had stopped paying her annuity. It was rather she who had refused to accept payment after deciding to challenge the legality of the agreement. And even after that decision, her siblings continued to deposit her 80 gulden with the city council, where it was held more or less in escrow until she decided to resume receipt of it. If such testimony seemed to aid and abet the enemy, more disturbing still to Anna must have been her curator's revelation that he, like her, had never actually read Herman Buschler's testament, nor so much as seen the parental marriage contract. And being thus unfamiliar with the key documents on which her case was being disputed, he declined to offer an opinion on the crucial question of whether the testament contradicted the marriage contract. Inasmuch as the claimed higher legal authority of the latter, wherein Anna's right to a full and equal inheritance was secure, had been Anna's main argument in challenging her father's discriminatory testament. She might have expected greater care and effort on the part of the man appointed to protect her interests. On the other hand, another relative and key advisor, her Rothenberger cousin Johann Hornberger, also deferred to the lawyers on the question of whether his father's testament might override a parental marriage contract. Despite his claim never to have read Herman Buschler's testament, cousin Conrad could still cite its provisions freely and in detail. He knew, for example, that it gave Philip a 1,200 gulden bond, along with the family house and the Lindenau manor, and that sister, Agatha, but not Anna, had been appropriately compensated for the latter properties, which made up a sizable part of the joint family property. There were new grounds for Anna to suspect, as she would soon allege, that her curator had all along been conspiring with her enemies. Conrad Buschler's ability to cite the provisions of her father's testament, sight unseen, was not, however, a prima facie case for a conspiracy. The details of the testament were readily available to him, as they were to any other interested party, through Anna's siblings, who were eager to have them known, since the testament so strongly favored them. The testament had also been publicly read to the entire family in an official ceremony, which Anna and her curator attended, so cousin Conrad could have known its key provisions without actually having held it in hand. Even so, one in the position should not have relied so trustingly on such biased communication for his knowledge of should not have relied so trustingly on such biased communication for his knowledge of data so vital to his client, especially if there were the slightest grounds for suspecting that her siblings were conspiring with the council against her. And it could hardly have been proper conduct for her curator not to have demanded copies of all the pertinent documents, and to have studied them with great care. Whether they were justified or not, Anna had her doubts about her curator's loyalty, which she obliquely expressed when she protested that he had not been properly sworn to his office. By that she meant that he had not, as was ordinarily required of one in his position, taken a personal oath of loyalty to her, a fact he and other witnesses frankly acknowledged during the hearings. His was rather an ad hoc appointment by the city council, which empowered him to act in an official capacity on her behalf only, and until she and her siblings could reach agreement on her share of the family inheritance. In other words, his was not a normal curatorship, but a special assignment occasioned by a specific conflict, the resolution of which also terminated his responsibility. By making her curator's failure to take the customary oath of his office grounds for nullifying the agreement with her siblings, Anna and her lawyer were citing what they believed to be both a technical violation of the curatorial position and an improper representation of her case by one who might be deemed to have been all too compliant with City Hall. If Anna had been manipulated by her siblings as blatantly as she claimed, surely someone else would have recognized it as well at the time. It is not credible that those who allegedly conspired against her also succeeded in co-opting Absolutely everyone involved in the case. A more likely scenario is that Anna had been motivated by something other than fear of her siblings. And the city council, when she acquiesced so politely in the agreement of 1543, she could reasonably have favored the agreement at the time simply for its immediate benefits, only later to be repulsed by its terms, when they proved to be less generous over the long run than she believed they would and should be. In other words, it is possible that both sides were telling the truth about what had happened on October 16th, 1543. A telling clue to Anna's state of mind in the months surrounding the agreement with her siblings appears in the testimony of cousin Johann Hornberger during the Machtelf hearings. He had watched her on that day in 1543 when her father's testament was read aloud to the assembled family, and her reaction had stuck in his mind. She began to weep, he testified, because she knew the trouble it would bring her. Her disinheritance had been her father's coup de grace, and he had delivered it at precisely the right time. By her own description, Anna was then more vulnerable than ever before or after in her life. The sudden death of her husband, a scant month after her father's, had left her a widow with a mountain of debt, and her health had been failing at the time as well. In addition to all of which, she was now to be disinherited. Just how dire her situation had become would be confirmed 9 months later in July 1544, when the whole militia arrested her in Monkheim as she attempted to travel from Speyer to Hall for her famous non-hearing before the city council on charges of defaming her siblings. In the intervening months, she had effectively scuttled the agreement with her siblings and fled to Neuenstein, and then on to Speyer, where she intended to challenge it in imperial court. In choosing this course of action, she had given up her new furnished house in Hall and her tidy 80 gulden annuity. At the time of her capture in Monkheim, the only possession on her person was a traveling case or bundle, as Bürgermeister Fuchter described it. When opened and searched, it was found to contain the residue of a harsh life. A few letters, pieces of leftover food, some strands of dirty red yarn, and 2 Heilbronn roots, or herbs of grace, a popular medicinal plant of Eurasian origin used as a cure-all. None who knew Anna's condition in those days doubted that the agreement, in giving her anything at all, was to her advantage. There is also no reason to doubt that she had been honest, that had been Anna's point of view as well when she signed it. She had good pragmatic reasons for reaching a prompt agreement with her siblings on her father's legacy, even if it meant the immediate forfeiture of any further claim to what she believed to be a full and fair share of that legacy. That does not mean, however, that her siblings and some city officials did not knowingly and in concert take advantage of her condition and profit from the agreement. For Anna, it was another situation in which agreeing to take half a loaf made more sense than being handed much less. Everyone had something to gain by the agreement. For Anna, it meant immediate debt relief and a basic livelihood. For her siblings, it was a modest act of generosity that promised to pay big dividends. By it, they expected to silence their sister's criticism, sanction their greater inheritance, and perhaps even soothe their own consciences to the extent that the latter were pained. For the city council, the accord promised to veil the misdeeds of a former Bürgermeister and to end the family feud that had gone on much too long and was threatening once again to bring the unwanted intrusion of a higher court into local affairs. Let's see how many pages. Is this it? Or? Yes, not too bad. The Sister's Keeper. Why had an agreement that seemed to serve the interest of so many collapsed so quickly? There is evidence that it was not Anna, but Philip and Agatha who actually sowed the seeds of its destruction. They did so by making the negotiations difficult from the start, and then after the agreement was signed by fulfilling their obligations in as slow and tedious fashion as possible. According to one witness, Philip and Agatha had at first not wanted to increase Anna's portion of the inheritance at all. And even when they recognized that peace with her was in their own best interest, they resented the concessions they felt forced to make. And when in fulfillment of the agreement they had to pay off her creditors, they proceeded cautiously and reluctantly, so much so that Councilman George Bernbeck had to spur them to action. By all reports, Philip was a creditor's nightmare, poring over each claim and requiring documentation for every pfennig. And at every opportunity, he and Agatha piously reminded Anna of their magnanimity and her unworthiness. Such presumption on the part of her siblings was particularly galling to Anna, who cited it among her grievances. If anything, she believed herself to be the most righteous party, and the one whose cause was just. In so believing, she was not without her supporters. Volk von Rosdorf declared her to be no bastard, and thought her father had been wrong to treat her as such. He also stated that the main gossip he had heard about her was that she had been treated unfairly, an indication that at least in the matter of her inheritance, popular opinion was by no means completely against Anna. Heidelberg law student David Schmidlin, who may have gotten to know Anna only after the events of 1544, he was 17 when they occurred, shared the view that her father had no right to recant the terms of the marriage contract with her mother, and he believed that she had been defrauded by her siblings. Plasterer Philip Strobel from Orangen, now Neuenstein, in the county of Hohenlohe, concurred in this judgment, for he had seen with his own eye the worn pewter Anna had been given as her share of chattel. The majority of witnesses still thought the agreement with her siblings, despite its iniquities, benefited Anna, and most were at a loss to explain why she rejected assistance she so urgently needed. Several cited Philip's refusal to pay new debts, along with the old as triggering her action, which was also her siblings' explanation. A more cynical explanation, and one her siblings may also have entertained, is that she had knowingly entered the agreement with mischievous intentions, believing that once it was firmly in place and her creditors had been turned her brother's way, he would be persuaded or even forced to pay her new debts as well as old. It was then only when Philip emphatically turned away new creditors that Anna opportunistically threatened a new round of litigation. Despite Anna's complaints about the agreement, her siblings did pay a sizable number of debts. The Heilbronn lawyer Jacob Ahinger claimed that most of her creditors, both Jewish and Christian, had been paid. Councilman George Bernbach personally acted as a middleman for Philip and Agatha with Jewish creditors in Frankfurt, delivering 325 gulden to them in payment of Anna's debts. And Gilg Menger, Anna's friend in Orr, got back from her brother the 40 gulden he had lent her. There is an initial act that may be said to have begun the unraveling of the agreement. It was most likely Philip's exceedingly meticulous negotiations with his sister's creditors. In fairness to Philip, curators and guardians at this time were expected to be tough. According to witnesses, he summoned each creditor to his house and required that he explain why, by how much, and since when his sister had been indebted to him, and to document his claim fully with bills and receipts. Philip intended thereby to learn the exact nature of each loan and put himself in a position to distinguish between fair and exorbitant interest. In that undertaking, every record was suspect, no question out of bounds, and rudeness a proper tool. Needless to say, Philip bruised many egos in the process. When he found everything to be in order and above board, he promptly paid the debt in full. When he believed that the conditions of a loan had been unfair or in error, he either bargained the creditor down or sent him away unpaid. Moses of Behingen, the only creditor Anna mentions by name, was alleged by Philip to have demanded more than double what Philip thought to be fair, and in the end agreed to pay. Moses was only the most persistent of Anna's creditors, and by no means the only one angered by her brother's intense scrutiny. Several others also complained to the city council that Anna's legitimate debts were not being paid despite the agreement with her siblings, and Anna, to her great dismay, found her creditors with Moses of Behingen in the lead, back on her doorstep. According to David Schmidlin, it was this series of events triggered by her brother's scrupulosity that ended the initial post-agreement amity among the three and drove Anna back into the court. When her creditors started hounding her again, she concluded that her brother did not intend to keep his part of the deal, refusing not only to pay debts incurred after the agreement, but a number incurred before. That conclusion, perhaps a bit hasty on her part, was further bolstered by her siblings' refusal to allow her to take from her father's house pieces of furniture to which she was particularly attached and which she greatly desired to have as her own. The majority of witnesses, however, rejected Anna's charge that her siblings had refused to pay her annuity, and that this refusal had justified her return to the courts. While it is true that she did not receive the annuity for several years, unwillingness on the part of her siblings to pay it was not the actual cause. According to Conrad Buchler, direct payments to Anna had stopped after the first quarterly payment, and thereafter her siblings, per order of the city council, faithfully deposited the amount specified by the agreement with the city. Exactly what the city did with the accumulating money during the interim is unclear. But in March 1548, by order of the imperial court in Augsburg, the council paid Anna and her new husband the accumulated sum. Thereafter, regular quarterly payments to the Sporlins resumed, receipts for which exist until July 1551. There's plenty of testimony to her siblings' fidelity to the agreement. Nobleman George Semph boasted to the commissioners of his brother-in-law Philip's goodwill in meeting his obligations. Not only did he pay many of Anna's debts in 1544, but he had also continued to pay her annuity to the present day, 1551. Something Sempt could personally attest, as he had, a few weeks earlier, placed another 30 gulden installment in Johann von Sporlin's hands. So the dispute over Anna's annuity was a settled matter after 1548. The part of the 1543 agreement, at least, had survived the agreement's collapse, albeit in a somewhat tortured fashion. In 1541, Emperor Charles V visited the city and dined in Hermann Buchler's house, today part of the Hotel Adelshof. A figure of the emperor commemorating this, and a second visit in 1546 stands over the entryway on Market Square. The ruins of Castle Limburg. In 1575, the Hauler demolished Castle Limburg, although not yet to the point depicted here, which portrays the ruins in 1910, much as they are today. When visiting, Anna came through the entry gate above the end of the front wall. gained access to the castle via the inner bridge between the entry gate and the tower remains, under which one passed into the castle's lush, protected gardens. The entryway to Castle Limburg, through which Anna passed many times. Daniel Troutwain's family coat of arms, as displayed on the gravestone of Conrad Troutwain. Erasmus, his wife Anna of Lodron, and their 3 children, in the Shanks room, Comberg Cloister. Cavalryman and his girlfriend. I am born cavalryman, elected and destined to war, cavalryman. Come with me, my little maid, and we'll be off to Italy. I'll provide you with a horse or wagon, and dress you up in silk or satin. With me you'll never know hunger. You'll have chicken boiled and fried. I have many tailor and ducats, which shall all become yours if only you'll stick by me. Great. The Hohenlohe Castle in Neuenstein was one of the several Hohenlohe castles in the region. There, Anna, apparently with the assistance of Rasmus, found a refuge from her father. See page 98. Here, the castle's inner courtyard is portrayed. The gravestone of Anna's sister, Agatha Shands. The banner around her head reads, O Lord Jesus, have mercy on me. The Buchler, top left, and Hornberger, top right. Coats of arms are clearly visible in St. Michael's Church. Gelbinger Street, where Anna moved after the settlement with her siblings, see pages 149 through 150, was a suburb outside Hall's walls. Today, the only surviving structure Anna would immediately recognize is the ancient tower known as the John Hosenturm. Collections of official documents like the Buchler family trial records were stored in great oaken cabinets, which were in turn placed in locked vaults. The one shown here contains the papers and deeds of the Sibylla Egan Foundation. Sibylla Egan, circa 1470 to 1538, lived 3 doors down from the Buchlers and established foundations for needy students and artisans, poor girls, pregnant women, and widows. And Hollish Frankish Museum. All right, goodbye. Till tomorrow, bruv.